She sat in row 18, alone and silent, just 13 years old. The flight attendant hit her, right in front of everyone. No apology, no one stood up. But the girl's mother was flying the plane, and what she did next changed everything, without saying a single word. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. Ziana Lowell sat quietly in seat 18C, her legs tucked in, sketchbook open on her lap. Her fingers moved in slow strokes, shading the wings of a bird she had been drawing since takeoff. Her backpack had been placed in the overhead bin above her by an older woman who noticed her struggling earlier. Ziana had whispered a thank you and taken her seat without causing any attention. She wore a gray hoodie and noise-canceling headphones that didn't fully cancel the noise. Every few minutes she glanced toward the aisle, careful not to make eye contact with anyone. She was flying alone for the first time, headed to California for a student art showcase her mom signed her up for. It was supposed to be a proud moment. Just as she bent down to sharpen her pencil with the tiny blade attached to her eraser cap, a sudden sharp voice snapped her head up. "Get up!" The flight attendant's voice wasn't loud, but it was cutting. A tall woman with a tight ponytail and stiff uniform stood over her. Her name tag read, Carmen Tisdale. Ziana blinked. She didn't understand. "Your bag's in the wrong place," Carmen said. "You can't just put it wherever you want. That's not how this works." Ziana's voice came out small. "A lady helped me. I didn't know." Before she could finish, Carmen slapped the back of her head with an open hand. Not hard enough to cause injury, but hard enough to sting and make the row behind them go silent. "Don't talk back," Carmen muttered, like she had done it before. Ziana's face flushed. Her mouth stayed shut. She didn't even reach up to touch the spot where she'd been hit. Her hands gripped the sketchbook tighter. A couple in the next row looked over, eyes wide, but turned away just as fast. A teenager in 18D took out one earbud but didn't say anything. Carmen straightened her collar, adjusted her cart, and moved on as if nothing happened. The airplane lights dimmed slightly. The buzz of engines filled the silence. Ziana lowered her head again, but this time, her pencil didn't move. She just stared at the blank corner of the page where she had meant to draw the clouds. Her chest hurt, but she didn't cry. Crying in public was something her mother warned her about long ago. Instead, she flipped the page and drew a hand, one just like her mom's, holding the controls of a plane. Ziana stayed hunched in her seat long after the slap. Her hoodie covered most of her face now, but her eyes stayed wide and fixed on the seat in front of her. She couldn't feel her drawing hand anymore. The pencil sat between her fingers, untouched. Around her, the cabin returned to its quiet rhythm, plastic trays closing, soft chatter, the rolling of the cart. But inside her, something had locked up. She tried to breathe slow like her mom taught her before competitions. Breathe in through the nose, hold it, let it go. But each breath caught halfway. She didn't feel safe. She didn't feel seen. She felt smaller than she ever had, like the seat itself was trying to disappear with her in it. A few rows behind, someone laughed, an easy, careless laugh, and it twisted in her ears. It wasn't the kind of sound that hurt her. It was the kind that reminded her no one else was hurting. No one else had been slapped. No one else was scared. Just her. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her phone. The signal was weak, but her last message to her mom still showed on the screen. "We just boarded. I'm okay." She stared at it. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then she locked the screen and slid it back into her pocket. In her lap, the drawing of the hand on the controls looked shaky now. The lines weren't steady. She turned the page again. Blank. She pressed the pencil down hard. Too hard, until it snapped. The sound wasn't loud, but she still flinched. The flight attendant, Carmen, passed by again, this time without looking. She smiled at a couple in row 19 and handed them a ginger ale with a napkin tucked under the cup. Ziana didn't ask for anything. She didn't press the call button. She sat still, letting the cold settle into her spine. She wondered if Carmen even remembered what she did, or if it was normal for her. A habit. Zayana wasn't sure what felt worse, the slap or the feeling that it didn't mean anything to the woman who did it. The lights in the cabin shifted to a warmer glow as the plane leveled out, but nothing about the air around Zayana felt warmer. Her hands lay flat on her thighs now, the broken pencil placed gently on her tray table like a piece of evidence no one would ever look at. She didn't touch her sketchbook again. Every part of her felt watched, even though no one was looking. That was the strange part. They had all seen it, but no one seemed to care. Carmen returned down the aisle, offering drinks this time. Zayana didn't look up. She kept her eyes on her knees, her breath slow and shallow. She could hear Carmen's voice, sweet, polite, too polite, as she spoke to the couple in 19A and 19B. "Would you like sparkling or still?" Her tone was light, pleasant, practiced, a sound meant for people who mattered. When Carmen reached row 18, she paused just long enough to see Zayana wasn't making eye contact. She didn't speak. She simply skipped the row entirely and moved on. Zayana didn't move. It was so clear. She was being erased, not loud, not direct, just ignored. A man in 18A, older, salt and pepper hair, clean gray sweater, shifted in his seat. He had noticed. He'd been noticing for a while now. He looked down at Zayana, then toward the aisle where Carmen had just walked. He pressed his call button. Nothing happened. A few minutes passed. Then he pressed it again. Still no response. Zayana glanced at him just once. Their eyes met for a moment. His expression was quiet but firm. She quickly looked away, nervous that someone might think she was causing more trouble. The man leaned slightly toward her, keeping his voice low. "Did she hit you?" Zayana's heart pounded. She didn't speak. She simply nodded once, almost too small to see. He didn't say anything right away. He sat back, folding his hands on his lap, then reached into the seat pocket and took out a small leather notebook. He began writing something carefully, line by line, with a calm hand. Then he looked at Zayana again. "Don't worry," he said gently. "You're not alone right now." Zayana felt a lump form in her throat. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep the tears from pushing forward. She wasn't sure if he meant it, or if this was something people just said to sound kind. But for a second she didn't feel invisible. She turned her eyes to the window. Clouds hung like soft mountains outside. She used to think clouds looked like safe places, but right now, they looked far away. Too far. Inside her pocket, her phone buzzed once. She pulled it out slowly. A new message from her mom lit up the screen. "Let me know when you land. I'm tracking you the whole way." Zayana stared at the message. Her fingers trembled. She typed 3 words. Something bad happened. Then she deleted them. She stared out the window again, and this time she whispered to herself, "Please land soon." The cabin lights dimmed again as the flight settled into its long stretch. Dinner trays clinked in the distance and soft music played from overhead speakers, some instrumental jazz that tried too hard to make the space feel calm. Zayana sat motionless, her head tilted against the window, but her body stiff, like she was bracing for something that hadn't happened yet. She kept her face turned away from the aisle, eyes watching the clouds slip by, though nothing outside felt real. Everything in her chest felt tight and jumbled, anger, fear, confusion. But above all that, shame. That quiet kind of shame that doesn't come from doing something wrong, but from being treated like you did. Her cheek still held the ghost of Carmen's slap, not the pain. It hadn't hurt that long, but the meaning behind it stayed. She kept replaying it over and over, the way Carmen's hand moved without hesitation. The look in her eyes, like Zayana didn't belong there. Like she was interrupting something just by existing. She wanted to cry, not because it hurt, but because she felt stupid for not speaking up, for sitting still, for going quiet when she should have said something. But that's not how she was raised. Her mom always said, "Stay calm, let the world show itself, then decide how to move." It made sense in theory, But now, sitting on a plane with people who saw and said nothing, it felt like doing nothing was just another way to get stepped on. She thought about pressing the call button herself, about asking for water, about testing whether Carmen would come back if she asked, but her finger hovered over the button and never moved. What if Carmen came with that same look in her eye? What if she said something loud again, something cruel? Ziana wasn't sure she could take it twice. In the row ahead, a boy laughed out loud at something on his tablet. 2 seats behind, someone asked for a second wine. Everything continued as if nothing had happened at all. That was the hardest part. The world just kept going. The man beside her, Mr. Halton, she'd overheard his name earlier when the flight attendant greeted him, was still sitting with his arms folded. He hadn't spoken again since he'd asked if Carmen hit her. He looked calm, but alert, like someone who didn't jump to react but didn't forget either. After a while, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. He typed something quietly, then looked toward the front of the plane. A few seconds later, he pressed his call button again. This time, he kept his hand near it, pressing and releasing it twice in slow intervals. Finally, a response. But it wasn't Carmen who returned. A younger male attendant with a soft voice and nervous smile leaned over slightly. "Is everything all right here, sir?" Mr. Halton didn't answer right away. He looked at Ziana. His voice came low but firm. "I need to speak with someone in charge. Not her," he said, nodding toward the front where Carmen had gone. "Someone else, privately, if possible." The attendant looked confused for a moment but nodded. "I'll check," he said, and quickly stepped away. Ziana stared down at her hands. She whispered, "You don't have to do that." Mr. Halton turned to her, not with pity but something steadier. Concern, maybe. "You didn't deserve that," he said plainly, "and she doesn't get to pretend she didn't do it." Ziana felt her throat tighten. "She'll just say I made it up." "I didn't," he replied. She didn't say anything after that. Just sat with that sentence in her chest. "I didn't." Someone had seen it. Someone had cared enough to say it out loud. Still, a quiet war played in her head. Maybe she should have stayed home. Maybe flying alone had been a bad idea. Her mom had said she'd be fine, had said she was ready. But maybe she wasn't. Maybe she'd messed it all up just by being here. She took out her sketchbook again. The bird she'd drawn before was still there, unfinished, one wing longer than the other. She flipped the page and, with the edge of the broken pencil, began tracing a new shape. Slowly, a different outline appeared. A woman in uniform, hand steady on the controls of a plane. Her mother. Ziana had seen her mom fly before years ago on family tours when it was allowed. She always walked through the cockpit with quiet confidence, answering questions calmly, handling turbulence without flinching. "Flying's about control," she'd once told her. "Not of the plane, of your focus." That memory sat heavy now, because somewhere on this plane, her mom was in that cockpit. Ziana hadn't seen her since boarding, hadn't been allowed to. She hadn't told anyone who her mom was, not even the passengers around her. It was safer that way, professional rules, boundaries. But now, sitting here with a burning cheek and a stomach full of knots, Ziana felt a sharp ache in her chest. Not just fear, not just shame. She missed her mom. She needed her. And yet, the distance between row 18 and the cockpit felt like miles. Carmen's voice drifted back from the front of the cabin, laughing lightly with another passenger. The sound didn't match the weight in Ziana Lowell's chest. It was the kind of laugh that felt practiced, polished. The kind flight attendants used to make passengers feel special. Ziana stared down at her lap, wondering how someone could be so two-faced, so cruel in private, and so charming in front of everyone else. The air felt heavier now. Her hoodie clung to the back of her neck. Her arms were crossed tight. She hadn't moved much in nearly an hour, but her muscles were sore from the way she was holding herself together. She shifted slightly, then winced. Her legs tingled from being still too long, but moving felt like too much. Too risky. What if someone saw her fidget and thought she was a problem again? Across the aisle, a woman handed back a tray and smiled. Carmen leaned over and called her sweetheart. Ziana caught that moment and it landed wrong in her stomach. Sweetheart. That word hadn't been used on her. She had only gotten commands, warnings, slaps. She had hoped someone would speak up earlier. Someone, anyone. A middle-aged woman in 17C had glanced over during the slap, just one startled look, and then turned right back to her magazine. A teenage boy with headphones in 19A had paused his video, raised an eyebrow, then shrugged. A married couple near the back didn't even blink. Ziana wasn't surprised, but that didn't stop the sting. Her mom once told her, "Silence can be louder than words when it's meant to keep you small." She hadn't understood what that meant back then. She understood now. The tray cart returned, pushed by the same male attendant from earlier, the one Mr. Halton had spoken to. Carmen wasn't with him this time. He looked down at Ziana, his expression careful. "Would you like anything to eat?" Ziana shook her head. He hesitated. "Water?" She nodded slowly, not lifting her eyes. He placed the cup gently on her tray. "If you need anything else, you just press your button, I'll come." His voice was soft, not pitying, just respectful. It helped, but only a little. As he moved away, Mr. Halton leaned slightly closer again. "I've flown with this airline for 12 years, he said quietly. "I've never seen something like that go unaddressed." Ziana didn't answer. She couldn't trust words right now, but she appreciated that he wasn't trying to fix it with a joke or tell her it would all be okay. He just told the truth. Her fingers tapped on her sketchbook. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm wasn't random. It was her way of staying grounded. Her mom taught her that too. "Create your own sound when the world tries to drown you out," she'd said once during a rough year in middle school. Back then, it had helped Ziana feel less invisible. Right now, though, nothing could block out the silence of being ignored. She glanced again at the front of the plane. The cockpit door stayed closed, as it should. But behind that door, just steps away, sat her mother, Commander Alara Brooks, chief pilot, flight leader, the woman who had trained for 20 years to sit in that chair, the woman who had flown through sandstorms in Qatar and snowfields in Greenland, the woman who held complete control over every inch of this aircraft. But Alara didn't know what had happened back here. That's what made it worse. Ziana could almost picture her, hands firm on the throttle, eyes scanning controls, headset snug over her curls, focused on the instruments, calm, steady, and completely unaware that her daughter was sitting in the back of this plane, shrinking under the weight of a moment she didn't know how to escape from. Part of Ziana wanted to break the rule. Just go up to the front, say her name, tell someone, "That's my mom up there." But something inside her tightened at the idea. It wasn't fear of punishment, it was fear of making things worse, of turning her mom's job, her reputation, into a conflict, into a situation. What if someone said she was manipulating things? What if Carmen turned it around and claimed Ziana was disruptive? She couldn't risk that. Not when her mom had worked so hard to be taken seriously in a space that rarely allowed women, especially women like her, to lead. Ziana had seen it all growing up. The double stares, the passive-aggressive comments, the way men questioned her mom's instructions like they needed confirmation. Alara had never let it show, but Ziana had felt it every time. She wouldn't put her mother in that spot. And yet, a quiet voice whispered inside her, "But what about you?" What about the fact that she'd been struck, that she'd been humiliated, erased, and treated like she didn't belong? Didn't she deserve to be protected too? She wiped her nose on her sleeve gently. She didn't want to cry. Crying would feel like giving Carmen something else to look down on. Instead, she opened her sketchbook again and pressed the pencil to the page, harder than before. The woman in the drawing, her mom, now had sharper eyes. The lines were deeper, her hands stronger. Ziana looked at the cockpit door one more time. She didn't know what would happen next, but something inside her had shifted. Maybe she couldn't speak up loudly, but she wouldn't stay invisible. Not anymore. 10 rows ahead, the soft ding of the flight phone echoed through the cabin. It was brief, just a single tone, but it cut through the low hum of engine noise and meal service like a signal. Most passengers didn't notice, but Carmen Tisdale, standing near the galley, did. She froze mid-pour, one hand steadying a bottle of sparkling water over a glass for a well-dressed man in business class. Her eyes narrowed for a split second, then she straightened and set the bottle down. "Excuse me," she said with a quick smile. Her voice was sugar-smooth, polished again. She turned and walked briskly toward the front. Ziana Lowell didn't see Carmen leave. She was still curled slightly in her seat, holding her sketchbook like it anchored her. But something in the air shifted. The pressure changed, and while she couldn't explain why, she sensed something had begun. Mr. Halton, still seated beside her, noticed too. He reached into his jacket pocket again, pulled out a business card, and quietly slid it into the flap of Ziana's sketchbook without a word. She glanced at him, confused, and he said gently, "Just in case someone pretends none of this happened." Ziana held the card in her fingers. It was heavy cardstock. Plain white, clean font, Gideon Halton, civil rights attorney. Her stomach flipped, not because she felt safer, though she did a little, but because this confirmed something she hadn't been sure of until now. It wasn't all in her head. Someone else believed it mattered. Up at the front of the plane, Carmen stood just outside the cockpit door, adjusting her uniform as if preparing for inspection. She pressed the small button again, waited, and the lock clicked open. A man with a headset leaned out, co-pilot Bryce Emerson. He didn't smile. "Captain Brooks would like a word," he said quietly, then stepped back. Carmen blinked, unsure. "Now?" she said immediately. Inside the cockpit, Commander Alara Brooks didn't turn around right away. Her eyes remained on the instrument panel, hands calmly switching settings as they entered cruising altitude. She had flown this route dozens of times, but this time her body held a stillness that didn't come from focus. It came from restraint. When Carmen stepped into the cockpit, Alara finally turned her chair just slightly, enough to face her. Her expression was unreadable. Her voice, when it came, was level. Cool, not cold, but firm enough that even the air felt sharper. "I've received a report," Alara said, "that a minor passenger in row 18 was physically struck by a member of cabin crew." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. "Was that you?" Carmen's posture stiffened. "Captain, there was a misunderstanding. The girl was being difficult. I needed her to follow instructions." "She was struck?" Alara repeated, slower this time. "Answer yes or no." There was a long pause. Carmen's jaw tightened. "I corrected her posture. It wasn't forceful, nothing aggressive." Alara didn't move. "A witness says otherwise. Passenger in 18A. Multiple call button presses were ignored, and it seems you skipped her during service." Carmen's cheeks flushed. She had an attitude. "These solo miners sometimes think they're—" "Finish that sentence," Alara said, her voice a little quieter now. "I want to hear exactly what you think she is." Carmen didn't. She swallowed hard. Alara turned back to her controls. "You'll remove yourself from the cabin for the rest of the flight. Your shift is suspended pending immediate review. You will not address or approach row 18 again." I don't think this is necessary," Carmen stammered. "With all due respect, Captain, this is a bit extreme for a minor miscommunication." Alara didn't look at her again. Her voice dropped low, measured even. "She is not just a passenger, she is my daughter." Carmen's face drained of all color. "I put her on this flight under full compliance. She boarded quietly. She followed every rule. You assaulted her." Alara's words were almost too calm now. "And now I am giving you one last professional courtesy before this becomes formal disciplinary action." Carmen opened her mouth, but no words came out. Alara pressed the comm switch and spoke without turning. "First Officer Emerson will supervise your removal to the staff jump seat at the rear. You are done for this flight." Carmen was escorted out silently, her face pale and mask-like. The cabin door closed behind her with a soft click. Back in row 18, Ziana didn't know what had just happened. The sound of the door closing was faint, but something in her chest loosened, just slightly. The tension in her jaw, her shoulders, her back, still present but shifting. The new male attendant returned and offered her a blanket. She didn't ask for one, but he said, "Captain Brooks asked me to make sure you're comfortable." Ziana blinked. She didn't speak, just nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what that meant, how much her mom knew, how much had been said, but deep inside she started to feel it. Not relief, not yet, but something else. The first edge of safety. The blanket felt soft against Ziana Lowell's arms, but she didn't pull it over her lap right away. She just held it, gripping the folded edge between her fingers. Her eyes stayed on the seat back in front of her, unmoving, though she wasn't seeing anything anymore. Her mind had gone somewhere deeper, somewhere slower. She didn't know what had just happened exactly. The cabin hadn't changed in any loud way. No one had raised their voice, no big announcements. But Carmen was gone, vanished like smoke. One moment she was weaving down the aisle with her sharp tongue and polite poison, and the next, nothing. The new male attendant, his name tag said L. McRae, now made quiet rounds through the cabin. His voice was gentle, offering water, pillows, soft smiles. Nothing fake, nothing forced. Just kind. He passed by Ziana's row again and asked softly, "Need anything, miss?" She shook her head, almost scared to speak. He nodded once and walked on, no questions. Ziana pressed her fingers to her face. It was warm, still burning from earlier, not from the slap anymore, but from everything that came after. The silence, the shame, the weight of being too scared to do what she wanted to do, stand up, speak up, yell something. She hadn't. She'd stayed quiet. But somehow, something had changed without her needing to shout. She should have felt stronger, but she didn't. Not yet. And that made her feel guilty. She pulled her sketchbook back onto her lap. It was bent now. The cover creased from being held so tightly. Inside, the pencil drawings had smudged. Her mom's face half faded on the page. She flipped to a new sheet but couldn't draw. The lines wouldn't come. Her hand hovered for long moments, unsure, not from lack of skill, but because she didn't know what to feel. Was she relieved? Was she angry? Was she weak for not telling the truth out loud? Or was staying quiet the only way to survive? A strange noise rose in her throat. Not a sob. Not quite. More like a tight breath wrapped in frustration. She let it out slowly and leaned her forehead against the cool window. Outside, night had begun to spread across the sky. The clouds below were darkening. The sun dipped at an angle, casting soft streaks of orange and violet across the horizon. It looked beautiful. It also looked so far away from everything that had just happened inside the plane. Ziana closed her eyes. She pictured her mom behind the cockpit door, hands steady, eyes forward. She imagined how she must have sounded when she spoke to her crew. Calm, direct, in control. She always was. Ziana had never seen her mother panic, never seen her lash out. She just did what needed to be done. Had she known what happened back here the whole time? Had someone told her? Did her mom figure it out on her own? And had she stepped in? That thought caught in Ziana's chest. Because if it was true, if her mom had found out and moved things behind the scenes, it meant she had been protected quietly without even asking for it. But then the guilt came rushing in again. Was that cheating? Did it look like she only got justice because her mom had power? What would people think? That she couldn't handle herself? That she ran to her mom like a scared kid? She hated that thought. She hated that being helped could feel like weakness. And yet, she didn't hate that someone had cared enough to do it. Ziana opened her phone again. No service, just the old messages still on the screen. She reread the one from her mom. "Let me know when you land. I'm tracking you the whole way." She stared at it, then typed something. "I'm okay. Kinda." She didn't send it, not yet. Instead, she saved it in drafts and tucked her phone back away. From the front of the cabin, She heard the soft voice of the co-pilot make a minor announcement, just a time update and a weather note for their destination. Nothing urgent. But the voice calmed her. It was steady, measured. She imagined her mom was right there beside him, flying through the dark with hands so familiar they didn't even tremble anymore. Zayana leaned her head back and slowly pulled the blanket up to her chest. It smelled like clean cotton and something faintly like lavender. It felt safe. She didn't fall asleep, not really. But for the first time since boarding, she closed her eyes without flinching. And for a little while she let herself drift without bracing for what might come next. The plane kept moving through the night sky, quiet and smooth, like nothing had happened. The turbulence was light, the hum of the engines steady. Passengers had begun to settle into the slow stretch before descent. Dim cabin, half-empty trays, seatbacks reclined slightly. Some were asleep, some scrolled on their phones, some whispered across armrests. But no one looked toward row 18 anymore. No one acted like the girl sitting there mattered. Zayana Lowell stayed wrapped in the blanket now, arms tucked beneath it like armor. Her sketchbook was closed for the first time since takeoff. She didn't feel like drawing. Her fingers were tired, not from movement, but from holding so much tension all day. She flexed them under the blanket, one at a time, like stretching pain out of a bruise. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same image, Carmen's face, that cold, fake smile, the sharp snap of her hand, the sound of silence afterward. Then the worst part, the looks, the averted glances, the turned heads, the quiet consent, that feeling of being so visible for one moment, and then immediately erased. She wondered if that's how her mom had felt all those years building her career. The first black woman in so many rooms full of men who didn't expect her to belong. Probably worse. But somehow her mom never showed that weight. She carried it behind her straight shoulders and quiet authority. Zayana felt like her shoulders were still hunched. She tried to sit straighter, but the effort felt awkward, forced, as if her body was stuck in the memory. Footsteps approached from the front again, light but quick. A small sound, nothing loud. Just leather soles on carpet. Zayana didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. A voice stopped beside her row. Calm, measured. "Excuse me, is it all right if I sit for a moment?" Zayana turned her head slowly. It was the co-pilot, a man in his 40s, clean-shaven, dark tie, nameplate reading First Officer B. Emerson. He looked straight at her, his hands folded, respectful. He gestured toward the empty middle seat beside her. "Only if you're comfortable with that," he added. Zayana nodded, unsure why. He sat down gently, not too close, keeping a small distance. His posture relaxed, not intrusive. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "I just wanted to say, you were seen." Zayana blinked. He didn't explain. He let the words hang there, not just witnessed, seen. Recognized. She didn't know how to respond. The man glanced around to be sure no one else was listening, then lowered his voice. "I won't speak out of turn, but I've worked with Captain Brooks for 8 years, and I've never seen her pause mid-flight to make a phone call from the cockpit." He gave a small smile, not amused, respectful. "She told me to make sure you knew without making a scene that what happened today was not okay, and it's being handled." Zayana stared down at her lap, her throat thick. Her voice barely made it out. "Is she mad at me?" The co-pilot's eyebrows lifted. "Mad? At you?" He shook his head. "She's furious, but not with you. She's furious that someone thought they could treat you like that and not answer for it." Zayana's eyes burned suddenly. She didn't want them to. She looked away quickly, swallowing hard. She didn't come back here herself because she said she didn't want to embarrass you, didn't want to make it harder. She said. He paused, then repeated softly. "She'll already have to carry enough of that moment. I won't let the spotlight add more." Zayana's chin trembled. She bit her lip and nodded. Once. Small. Sharp. "She also asked me to check if you'd like to come to the cockpit before we land." Not for any reason, just to see her. But only if you want to. Zayana didn't answer right away. She didn't trust her voice. The emotions rising were too much, too fast. Her chest ached with a tight swirl of things. Relief, love, sadness, guilt, pride, exhaustion. The co-pilot didn't press. He simply stood up after a moment. "Take your time. We've got a bit before descent." He gave a short nod, then walked quietly back toward the front. Zayana turned her face toward the window again, her eyes blurred now. Her mom knew. Her mom knew. And instead of turning it into a scene, she'd made it right from the shadows. Quiet, controlled, just like her. Zayana let herself cry now, just a little. Not because she was weak, because she realized she hadn't been alone. Not for a second. She wasn't small. She wasn't forgotten. She was seen. For a long time, Zayana Lowell didn't move. She sat in her seat, curled beneath the blanket, eyes unfocused, staring through her reflection in the window. The sky outside was darker now, the last hints of sunset swallowed by night. The cabin glowed dimly behind her. Soft yellows, blinking seatbelt signs, the occasional rustle of someone shifting or coughing. But inside her, the noise had quieted. She kept replaying what the co-pilot said. You were seen. No one had ever said that to her before. Not like that. Not in a moment where she felt so small she barely believed she existed to the people around her. And her mother. Her mother had known the whole time, had felt it, had acted. Not with panic, not with shouting, but with a kind of power that moved in silence. Zayana reached up and wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie. The fabric was rough and slightly damp now, but it felt real. More real than the numbness she'd been wrapped in for hours. Her breath was slow, deeper now. Her chest still ached, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. A quiet grief. Not just for what happened to her today, but for all the time she had swallowed moments like this and said nothing. She thought about her old school, about the counselor who once told her she should tone down the attitude if she wanted to be liked more. She remembered a teacher who had accused her of copying a project because middle schoolers don't usually write like that. She remembered the cashier who handed change to the white girl behind her first. Each of those moments felt small when they happened. She never told anyone, not even her mom. But today wasn't small. Today, someone laid a hand on her. And today, someone paid attention. She reached for her phone and opened her draft message again. I'm okay. Kinda. Her thumb hovered, then deleted the words. She started over. I heard you knew. Thank you. She didn't send it, not yet, but it felt good to write. She looked around the cabin now. Everyone else seemed normal, comfortable, watching movies, flipping pages, sipping water, stretching legs. The kind of quiet that comes after dinner service and before landing. None of them knew what it took for Zayana to feel safe again. None of them would remember this flight. But she would. She turned slightly and looked at the middle seat between her and Mr. Halton. He was awake, reading now, a slim paperback held in one hand, glasses perched on his nose. He hadn't said anything since earlier. He didn't need to. She reached into her sketchbook, pulled out the card he'd given her and slid it gently into her hoodie pocket. She didn't know if she'd need it. Maybe she wouldn't. But it felt good to hold something that said, "You matter enough for someone to take notes." The announcement tone dinged, soft and familiar. A calm voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We'll be beginning our descent shortly. We've had a smooth ride so far, and weather in the area remains clear. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for flying with us tonight. Zayana closed her eyes. That voice. Her mother's voice. She hadn't heard it since the morning before boarding. Now it came not as a comfort from across a kitchen table, but through a speaker overhead, calm and unshakable, carrying the whole aircraft beneath it. She felt her throat close slightly. She wanted to cry again, but this time the tears weren't heavy. They were full of something she hadn't known she needed until today. She reached for her sketchbook again, flipped past the old pages, and found one that was half drawn. A flight deck, control panels, levers, small blinking lights. She began filling it in, carefully. The outlines were clearer now. She added a figure in the seat, sharp posture, hair in a bun, eyes forward. Then she drew a second figure just behind her, standing at the doorway, smaller but strong, watching. For the first time since she boarded, Zayana smiled. It was small. No one saw it, but it was real. She closed the sketchbook gently, held it in her arms, and whispered to herself, just barely audible, "I do belong here." And this time she believed it. The seatbelt sign flickered on with a soft chime, and a voice from the intercom, clear and steady, announced that the descent would begin in just a few minutes. Zayana Lowell fastened her belt without looking down. Her hands moved on their own, automatic, but her thoughts weren't in the present. She stared at the back of the seat in front of her, her face expressionless, but inside, she was sorting through everything, one piece at a time. She wasn't trying to forget what happened anymore. She was trying to understand it, trying to make sense of why something so wrong could happen in public, why no one had stopped it, and why it had taken someone in power, someone connected, to finally make it matter. The ache in her chest wasn't fear now. It was heaviness, a full-body kind, the kind that settled in your bones after you kept quiet too long. She thought about Carmen again, the way she'd acted so confident, like Zayana was the one being difficult, like correcting a child with her hand was normal, expected, even justified. That moment hadn't been about rules. It hadn't even been about the bag. It was about placement, about where Carmen thought Zayana belonged. Not in that overhead bin, not in that seat, not in first boarding, not in that airspace, and certainly not being defended. That slap wasn't just physical. It was a message. But now, Zayana understood something Carmen hadn't. She did belong, and someone powerful had made that clear without ever raising her voice. The quiet reappearance of the male attendant, Mr. McRae, interrupted her thoughts. He knelt gently in the aisle beside her. "Miss Lowell," he said softly, "Captain Brooks wanted me to let you know. You can come up now if you'd like." She said the cockpits opened for just a few more minutes before final approach. Zayana's heart skipped. She hesitated. Her first instinct was to say no, stay in her seat, avoid attention, avoid being seen walking through the cabin where people would watch, maybe whisper, maybe ask questions. But then again, hadn't she spent enough time trying not to be seen? She nodded, just once. He smiled and stood. "Follow me when you're ready." Zayana peeled the blanket off slowly. Her legs were stiff. Her body didn't want to move at first, every muscle sore from holding tension all flight. But she stood, carefully, one foot, then the other. Her sketchbook she left on the seat. As she stepped into the aisle, a few heads turned. Not many. A woman gave her a passing glance, then looked back down. A man barely noticed. No one stopped her. No one whispered. Maybe they didn't know what had happened. Or maybe they knew and just didn't want to remember. Zayana didn't care. She walked forward. Each step felt strange, like she was walking into a place that hadn't been built for her. But step by step, the weight began to lift. Slowly, quietly, until she reached the door. The cockpit opened with a quiet click, and there she was, Ilara Brooks, in uniform, headset off, chair turned toward the door. Her mother. Her eyes softened immediately, and in that one look Zayana felt everything. The strength, the worry, the love. Not panic, not guilt, just fierce, unwavering protection. "Hey, baby," Ilara said softly. Zayana didn't speak at first. Her throat tightened again, but this time not with fear. With relief, with everything she'd been carrying for hours and didn't know how to say. She stepped in. Ilara stood and opened her arms. Not fast, not overly emotional. Just open, waiting. Zayana walked straight into her, buried her face into her mother's chest and didn't speak for a full minute. Ilara held her. Not tightly, not with a crushing grip, just long enough for Zayana to feel the steady heartbeat beneath the uniform, the kind of rhythm that said, "I've got you." "I didn't know what to do," Zayana whispered into her shoulder. I didn't say anything. I just sat there. Ilara pulled back enough to look at her. You didn't have to say anything, she said. That wasn't your job, that was mine. Zayana blinked through tears. I didn't want to make it about you. Ilara smiled faintly. It wasn't about me. It was about someone thinking you didn't matter. And I wanted them to know they were wrong. The cockpit was quiet, filled only with the soft beeps of instruments and the low chatter of air traffic control in the background. The co-pilot gave them space, focused on preparing for descent. The moment was theirs. Ilara pointed toward the captain's seat. Want to sit for a minute? Zayana hesitated, then nodded. She stepped forward and lowered herself into the seat. Her feet didn't quite reach the pedals. Her hands hovered over the controls, careful not to touch anything. Ilara leaned over her shoulder. That's the yoke. This, she pointed to the panel, is your primary nav. And up there, that's where I watch the sky. Zayana stared at the panel, overwhelmed by how complex it looked, and how right it felt to be there. You fly all this by yourself? She asked. Ilara grinned. Number, it takes a team. But I lead the team. Zayana looked up at her mother. I think I want to learn this one day. Ilara's eyes lit up. She knelt beside her daughter again and said, calm and clear, then I'll teach you. The cockpit lights reflected off the windows, and somewhere outside, the landing gear began to deploy. The plane was descending, but inside, Zayana was rising, quietly, stronger than before. She wasn't just the girl in row 18 anymore. She was the daughter of the woman who flew the plane, and the girl who might fly it next. The cockpit hummed softly around them, filled with blinking panels, muted engine rumbles, and the low crackle of air traffic control feeding instructions through the speakers. The light was dim, tinged with pale green and amber, wrapping the space in a glow that felt half futuristic, half sacred. Zayana Lowell stayed in the captain's seat, both hands resting on her knees. She didn't touch the controls, but she didn't want to leave either. It was strange how safe she felt here, inside the room that held so much responsibility, so much power. She wasn't used to associating power with peace. But sitting here, inside the seat that led the entire plane, felt steadier than any place she'd been all day. Her mom, Captain Ilara Brooks, crouched beside her again, adjusting the cuff of her uniform. She didn't rush her daughter or ask if she was okay again. She just let her be. That was always how Ilara operated. Calm, observant, giving space but never stepping away too far. Zayana glanced down at the floor. You didn't get in trouble, did you? Ilara raised her eyebrows slightly. For what? For doing what you did. For me. Ilara smiled a little. Number. And if I had, I'd do it again. Zayana pressed her lips together. I didn't want people thinking I needed special treatment. Ilara leaned her arm on the side panel, looking at her daughter directly now. You didn't get special treatment. You got protection. What Carmen did wasn't just rude. It was dangerous. And if anyone tries to make you feel like speaking up is asking for too much, they're trying to keep you small. Zayana blinked. She didn't answer right away. Sometimes, Ilara added, people will act like your silence makes things easier. But it only makes it easier for them. Not for you. Zayana's voice came out quieter than she intended. I thought maybe I overreacted. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Ilara's face turned serious. Z, she hit you. That's never okay. Not in a plane, not in school, not anywhere. You didn't overreact, you stayed calm, you stayed safe, that was smart. But don't let your brain start shrinking the truth just to survive it. That last sentence hit harder than Zayana expected. She lowered her head again. She had been shrinking it, mentally making it smaller so it would fit into something she could carry alone. But her mom wasn't letting her do that this time. She was forcing the truth to take up space. And that truth was this. Zayana had been wronged, silenced, and nearly convinced it didn't matter. Ilara reached out and adjusted the shoulder strap of Zayana's hoodie. You know, When I was first training to fly, I had an instructor who used to look me dead in the eye before every solo flight and say, "If you want the sky to respect you, you better take your seat like you own it." I didn't get it back then. I thought he was just being dramatic. She paused, then added, "Now I think he was right." Zayana looked up. "Even if people think you don't belong there?" "Especially then," Ilara said. A beat passed between them. Outside, the stars blinked faintly in the corner of the sky. Below them, city lights had begun to scatter across the earth like embers from a fire, some large, some faint, some in neat lines and others like spilled glitter. The world was getting closer. The co-pilot gently cleared his throat from behind them. "Captain, approach clearance just came through." Ilara nodded. "Right. Let's get ready." She turned to Zayana. "You can stay up here until we get close. Then you'll need to be back in your seat for landing." Zayana nodded, slowly rising. She stood beside the chair a second longer, taking it all in. The lights, the quiet confidence of the room, the steadiness of her mother's presence. Then she reached out and hugged Ilara again, this time tighter, not because she was scared, but because she was proud. Ilara hugged her back, murmuring into her hair, "You're stronger than you know." Zayana stepped out of the cockpit. The door closed gently behind her. The aisle stretched ahead, long and quiet. Her legs shook slightly, not from fear this time, but from release. As she walked past rows of sleepy passengers and flickering screens, something felt different now. She didn't shrink herself. She didn't try to disappear. If people looked, they looked. Let them. She had taken her seat. She had been hurt, and she didn't yell or scream. But the system had felt it anyway, and she'd gotten back up, on her own feet, not just as a passenger, not just as the pilot's daughter, but as someone who belonged in the air just as much as anyone else. Zayana Lowell walked back down the aisle slowly, each step measured, not rushed. Her legs still felt a little unsteady, like they were trying to relearn how to carry her weight, this new weight that wasn't about fear, but about truth. Her head wasn't bowed this time. She didn't scan for reactions or try to make herself smaller, but she felt every eye on her, whether they were watching or not. Some passengers glanced up briefly as she passed. Most didn't hold the look. No one said anything. But something about the silence had changed. It wasn't the cold, dismissive kind from earlier. It was quieter now, almost unsure. Like the people around her knew something had happened, but they didn't know how to ask about it. Or maybe they weren't sure if they had the right to. Zayana returned to row 18 and slid back into her seat without a word. Mr. Halton looked up from his book. He didn't smile. He didn't ask questions. He just closed the cover and said gently, "You all right?" Zayana nodded once. "Yeah, I think I am now." He gave a small nod in return, then passed her a fresh cup of water that he must have requested while she was gone. She took it, feeling the coolness against her palms. The kindness of it settled somewhere deep in her chest. She glanced toward the sketchbook she had left behind on the seat. It had shifted a little, the corner sticking out from beneath the armrest. She reached for it and pulled it back into her lap. The cover was slightly bent, the pages inside wrinkled from pressure, but it still felt like hers, still felt like a piece of herself no one had taken away. She opened it slowly and flipped back to the cockpit drawing, the one she'd started just before everything changed. She stared at the figure she'd drawn in the pilot's seat. It was clearly her mother. Strong lines, precise hands. But now she added something else. A headset, a soft crease of focus around her brow, and a quiet smile at the corner of her mouth. Then she turned the page and drew something new. A seat. One she'd never drawn before. It wasn't grand. It wasn't in the cockpit or even by the window. It was a regular airplane seat. Row 18, economy class. And in it a small figure. Hoodie, hair tucked behind one ear. Face turned slightly outward, not downward. The eyes weren't scared anymore. They were watching, learning, growing. Zayana's hand shook a little as she outlined the tray table. then the open sketchbook on the girl's lap, then the pencil in her hand. A mirror within a mirror. When she finished, she sat back and exhaled slowly, pressing her palm flat on the paper to smooth out the ripples. That drawing wasn't perfect. The lines were uneven, the perspective slightly off, but it was honest. That girl in the sketch wasn't waiting to be saved. She was sitting with everything she had: pain, courage, confusion, resilience, and staying upright anyway. The announcement chime rang again. The captain's voice, her mother's voice, came over the intercom, even and calm. "Flight crew, prepare for landing." Zayana smiled softly. That voice, so composed, so exacting, now held a second meaning. It wasn't just guiding a plane, it was guiding her. She tucked the sketchbook back into her backpack, zipped it carefully, and rested her hands on top. Mr. Halton broke the quiet again. "You ever flown before?" Zayana looked at him. "Not alone. Not like this." He nodded thoughtfully, then added, "Well, if you ask me, you handled it better than half the adults on this plane." She didn't respond with words. She just let out a quiet breath of agreement, and for the first time all day, it didn't feel like a lie. The plane began its final descent. The soft tremble of wheels lowering, the dimming of lights, the shift in cabin pressure. And Zayana sat upright, back straight, eyes ahead, not bracing anymore but ready. Not to fight, not to hide, just to land, fully in her own seat on her own terms. The plane tilted gently as it began its final approach, the skyline of Denver coming into view through the cabin windows. Clusters of lights scattered across the ground, like someone had dropped a handful of stars and let them settle into place. Zayana Lowell sat upright, her back pressed lightly against the seat, hands still resting on her backpack. Her fingers didn't shake now, her shoulders no longer curled inward. But her mind was full. The weight of the day hadn't disappeared. It lived inside her still. But it had changed shape, less like something crushing her and more like something she was learning how to carry. Heavy, yes, but hers now. The descent was smooth. The cabin buzzed with quiet motion, passengers pulling on jackets, adjusting tray tables, whispering half sentences to one another. But none of it reached Zayana in the same way it had earlier. Earlier, she had felt like she didn't belong here, like the air around her wasn't hers to breathe. Now she sat with a different kind of stillness, not quiet out of fear, but out of presence. She wasn't hiding anymore. A soft voice came over the intercom. It was the co-pilot this time. "We'll be on the ground in approximately 6 minutes. Weather is clear. Thank you again for flying with us tonight." He didn't say her name, didn't mention what had happened, but somehow the words landed gently, like a confirmation that this story wasn't ending in silence. As the wheels touched down, the thump and roll vibrated through the cabin, and for a moment, Zayana closed her eyes. She let the sensation move through her, not just the landing, but everything. The slap, the shame, the blanket, the sketchbook, the cockpit, her mother's voice, the choice not to shrink. She opened her eyes slowly as the plane taxied to a stop. Lights along the runway glowed soft blue and white, casting long shadows on the tarmac. Outside, night had fully taken over. But Zayana didn't feel lost in the dark. The seatbelt sign clicked off with a ding, and the cabin stirred to life. Passengers reached for bags and coats. Laughter bubbled from somewhere in the back. No one rushed, but there was movement again. Normal, casual, indifferent. Zayana waited. She didn't stand. She wasn't going to push forward or squeeze into the aisle. For once, she wasn't in a hurry to disappear. Mr. Halton stood beside her, grabbing his briefcase from the overhead bin. He looked down at her, his eyes kind. "You ever need someone to remind you what you did today, kid? Just call me," he said, tapping his card again where it peeked from her pocket. Zayana smiled softly. "Thank you for not looking away." He nodded. "We're not all brave, but we all need someone who is." Then he stepped into the aisle and joined the line of passengers moving toward the door. Zayana stayed seated. The flight attendants didn't rush her. McRae gave her a polite nod, eyes careful, not intrusive, and then she saw her, standing just beyond the open cockpit door. Captain Elara Brooks, full uniform, arms crossed, head held high, waiting. Not in a way that said hurry up, not in a way that said I'm watching you, just there, steady, present, like a lighthouse at the edge of the sea. Ziana stood slowly, slipped her arms through her backpack. She took one step, then another, walking up the narrow aisle past passengers retrieving their bags, none of them speaking to her. She didn't need them to. As she stepped through the first-class section, she noticed something. 2 flight crew members waiting near the galley, quietly standing in position, eyes lowered slightly. Not defensive, not cold, just quiet, aware. Carmen was nowhere in sight. When she reached the cockpit, her mother didn't speak right away. She simply reached forward and gently fixed the collar of Ziana's hoodie where it had folded in. "Go on," Elara said, gesturing down the jet bridge. "I'll be right behind you." Ziana paused, looking at her. "You good?" her mother asked. Ziana nodded. "Yeah." She hesitated for just a moment longer, then whispered, "You didn't just land the plane." Elara tilted her head slightly. "You landed me," Ziana said. Elara blinked, then smiled, a quiet, private smile only a mother could give. "That's what captains do." Ziana turned and walked down the ramp, her steps slow but solid. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly as she passed under them. Outside the terminal windows, the runway lights still blinked against the dark, but she didn't feel far from home anymore. She felt closer to who she was meant to become, and tonight, that meant more than anything. The jet bridge stretched out ahead of Ziana Lowell like a tunnel of cool air and low white light. Each step she took echoed faintly beneath her sneakers. She could still feel the vibration of the plane in her knees, that deep low hum of thousands of moving parts. But now, her own body felt quieter. No more tremble in her fingers, no more panic curled behind her ribs, only a strange, steady silence. Passengers ahead of her walked in clumps, business travelers, parents with strollers, teenagers dragging duffel bags, all moving forward like it was just another flight. And maybe for them, it was. Maybe they'd sleep it off, forget the seat numbers, forget the snack options, forget the faces. But Ziana knew this flight would live inside her long after her feet touched the ground. It wasn't about the route. It wasn't even about what had been taken from her. It was about what she'd reclaimed by the time they landed. Her mother's voice still echoed in her ears. "That wasn't your job. That was mine." And still, Ziana couldn't shake the quiet guilt of wondering if she had done enough. She didn't speak up. She didn't protest. She didn't confront. Would people say she stayed silent because she was scared? Would someone else in her shoes have stood up and shouted and made the whole plane turn their heads? Would that have been stronger? Or maybe strength looked different than she'd been taught. Maybe strength was sitting still, even when humiliated, and choosing not to unravel. Maybe strength was making it to the end of the flight with your dignity still inside your chest. Maybe it was choosing not to crumble under the pressure of someone else's assumptions. At the end of the jet bridge, the terminal opened up, bright, wide, full of artificial light and movement. A flight crew coordinator stood nearby with a clipboard, checking something off as the pilot team stepped through. Elara Brooks joined them moments later, calm, composed, as if she hadn't just navigated an in-flight disciplinary event while piloting through regulated airspace. Her presence held weight but not noise. She didn't need it. Ziana kept walking, just a few paces ahead, her mother behind her now. Not because she'd left her, because she trusted her. As they neared the baggage carousel, a quiet figure stepped forward from a waiting area. A woman in a gray pantsuit, tablet in hand, badge clipped to her coat. "Miss Lowell?" she asked softly, eyes kind but focused. Ziana's heart skipped. "Yes?" "I'm Dana Kerrigan, Passenger Relations, Stratus Air. We were informed there was an onboard incident, and I'd like to speak to you briefly before you leave the terminal." Ziana stiffened. Her mother stepped closer, eyes trained sharply on the woman. "She's a minor. You'll speak to me first. Kerrigan nodded respectfully. Of course, Captain Brooks, no rush. We're just collecting internal statements for the record. You're not obligated to share more than you're comfortable with, but we want to ensure this is documented properly. Zayana looked at her mom. Her mom looked back. There was a pause. Then Zayana surprised herself. It's okay, she said softly. I'll talk, just not here. They followed Kerrigan into a small service lounge nearby. Empty chairs, soft carpet, a pot of untouched coffee on the counter. Kerrigan set her tablet down on a side table, tapped a few buttons, and turned on the recording function. You can speak freely, she said. Nothing will be used without your consent. Zayana nodded slowly, her eyes drifting to the corner of the room. She took a deep breath, then another, and then she began. She hit me, Zayana said. Her voice was even, but her throat tightened anyway. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to remind me I didn't matter. She kept going. She told them about the overhead bin, about the cold tone, about the way Carmen had served everyone else and skipped her on purpose, about the silence of the rows around her, about the moment she realized no one was going to say anything if she didn't. She didn't cry. Not now. She spoke like someone who had held the words in too long and finally decided they didn't belong to shame anymore. When she finished, Kerrigan tapped a final note and stopped the recording. Thank you, she said. You didn't deserve that. And we will follow this to its end. Zayana just nodded. No victory lap, no applause, no headlines. Just the truth, spoken out loud. When they stepped out of the lounge again, the terminal had begun to quiet. The rush of passengers had thinned. The world had moved on. Zayana and her mother walked together toward the escalators. The terminal lights cast long shadows behind them. Do you think people will believe me? Zayana asked. Ilara looked at her. That's not the point. Zayana frowned. Then what is? Ilara's voice was steady. That you believed yourself, and said it anyway. That silence stayed between them for a few paces. And then, finally, Zayana smiled. Not because it was over, but because she was no longer carrying it alone. Outside the terminal, the night air was colder than expected. The wind was dry but soft, curling through the drop-off lanes and rustling the hem of Zayana Lowell's hoodie as she stepped out onto the sidewalk. Her backpack was slung over one shoulder, sketchbook tucked securely inside. The wheels of her carry-on suitcase bumped quietly along the concrete as she walked beside her mother, who now carried her own pilot's duffel in one hand and kept the other gently at Zayana's back. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence between them was no longer heavy, though. It was thoughtful, warm even. It was the kind of quiet that happens after something painful, when both people know the worst is behind them, but neither wants to rush the healing. A row of taxis waited at the curb. One pulled forward. Ilara opened the trunk for the driver, loaded both bags herself, quick and practiced, and then opened the back door for her daughter. Zayana slid in without a word. Ilara joined her a moment later and the door clicked shut behind them. As the car pulled away from the terminal, the lights of the airport faded into the background. The driver didn't speak. Just soft jazz on the radio and the steady motion of the highway beneath them. Zayana leaned her head against the cool window and looked out. For the first time in hours, she let her body fully relax. Her knees unwound, her shoulders dropped. The tension that had wrapped itself around her since takeoff had finally begun to leave her limbs. Her voice came out quiet. Do you think I should have done more? Her mother didn't answer right away. Zayana continued. Said something earlier, pushed back, told the passengers I don't know. Anything. Ilara's reply was soft. You did what you could. And you survived with your voice intact. That's already more than most. But it still happened, Zayana whispered. Even with you flying the plane, even with me doing everything right. Ilara nodded slowly. Yes, and that's what hurts the most. They rode in silence for another moment. Then Ilara added, but you turned it into something no one could erase. You made it real, spoken, documented. You took it out of the dark and placed it where someone had to see it. Zayana closed her eyes. She thought about Carmen, about the slap, about the silence, about the man who'd seen her, the water she didn't get, the blanket, the sketchbook, the co-pilot's voice, her mother waiting at the cockpit door, and then the drawing she made of herself in her own seat, facing forward. When she opened her eyes again, the lights of the city were growing taller. Buildings, signs, street lamps, a world full of motion and noise, still spinning forward. She reached into her bag and pulled out her sketchbook. Her thumb brushed over the worn edge of the cover. She opened it to a blank page. With the taxi humming beneath her, she began to draw, not to distract herself, not to hide, but to remember. She drew a plane, not from the outside, from the inside. She drew row 18, the aisle, the tray, the armrest, and in the seat she drew a girl, hoodie, quiet face, pencil in hand. But this time she added something new, a shadow behind the girl, a figure just out of frame, calm posture, steady stance, watching but not stepping in unless needed. It was her mother, not just the woman who flew the plane, but the one who helped her land again, even when she didn't know how. She closed the book and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "I won't forget this." Alara looked over. "You don't have to." As the car slowed in front of their hotel, the headlights lit up the front glass doors. The driver put it in park. Alara reached for her bag, but Zayana paused. She looked at her mother, really looked. For years she had admired her from a distance, watched her walk through airports with quiet confidence, watched her sit behind polished desks and glass walls, watched her fly jets across time zones without breaking stride. But tonight, Zayana had seen something more. Her mother wasn't just strong, she was anchored. And tonight, when Zayana's voice was almost lost, that anchor had held. They stepped out into the cool night air again. Alara held the door open as Zayana walked through first. The lobby lights were warm, golden, safe, the kind of glow that promised rest, not performance. No need to explain, no need to defend. Just breathe. As they entered the elevator, Alara reached over and pressed the button for their floor. Zayana leaned against the wall, her eyes heavy now, a different kind of tired. Not fear, not grief, just release. When the doors opened and they stepped into their room, Alara headed to her side of the suite and began to unbutton her uniform jacket. Zayana, still holding her sketchbook, crossed the room to the window and pulled back the curtain. The city stretched wide beneath them, glowing quietly. Planes blinked in the distance, high and small, moving across the sky like silent prayers. Zayana touched the glass. Then she whispered, "I want to fly one day. Like you." Behind her, Alara's voice came low. "You already are." And in that still moment, surrounded by a world that had tried to silence her, Zayana Lowell stood tall in the quiet. Not invisible, not voiceless, not just someone's daughter, but her own beginning. If you felt something while watching this story, give it a like. Share your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more